Martha, we have a lot of less than ideal ways to try to get what we want. Some of those ways include being manipulative, maybe even a little sneaky, or even pushiness. When you work with relationships or even with individuals, it's important to figure out how to help people have those very real, sometimes scary conversations about what they want instead of going underground or using tactics that really don't help at all. So that's what I'm wanting us to share with our listeners today. And if you're ready to go there, I think we should get talking. What do you think?
So exciting. So much is possible through communication. Let's dig in.
So I thought maybe we would start by having both of us talk about ways that people go underground rather than communicating directly and how that manifests in different individuals. What do you notice?
I notice there are many different ways that people do it. And I think it comes under the sort of broad umbrella of conflict avoidance. So if somebody's afraid of conflict, afraid of communication, doesn't believe that they're going to feel seen and heard, has a partner who tends to have big emotions, if they're uncomfortable, any number of situations involving potential conflict after taking an emotional risk, making yourself vulnerable, I think a lot of people choose to retreat, go underground, be secretive, or just sideways, manipulative, pushy, like you said in the very beginning. What do you see as ways that people go underground?
I think the most common ones, although there are many, is to start blaming. Instead of being able to name what I want, it feels a little bit easier to blame the other person for why this isn't happening or what they're doing wrong. So blame is a really big one that I see. Deferring to the past, talking about things that were upsetting instead of being able to come present to the moment and communicate. This is what's hurting me. This is what's bothering me. Asking what's happening for the other person. And sometimes leaving, just exiting the space altogether. I'm going to go for a drive or I'm going to go to another room in the house. And then here's an oldie but goodie that I know everybody has seen, and that's being passive aggressive. So those are kind of the top four contenders that I think probably everybody's used at one point or another. Do you see
Uh,
those in your practice at all?
all the time. Also, secrecy and deception. So if I go underground, I want to try to fly under the radar and not be noticed. And then if you ask me about it, I might lie a little bit or a lot.
So true. So communication is a door opening for relationship. And when we engage in effective communication, we can share so much, which gives the people who we love an opportunity to learn more about who we are. And we can also learn so much about others. Why do you think it is people defer to some of these tactics instead of engaging in real communication that can affect change?
Hmm. That's a very deep question. Why do
I didn't mean to
we
go so early.
why do we avoid conflict? Vulnerability,
Mm.
perhaps. It's scary to say what you think and feel and want to somebody else when you're not sure that they're going to agree with you. Sometimes it feels like it might break the relationship. Sometimes it might feel like if I tell my partner this aspect of myself, then they'll know that I'm a complete fraud, or they're not going to like me, or they're going to think I'm a freak in some kind of way, or they're going to pathologize me. And all of a sudden, the bubble will burst. I will no longer be lovable. There's so much to lose from identifying what's important to you and then sharing it. So vulnerability is the first thing that comes to my mind. How about you?
Oh, that is really good. How I think I would answer that question has to do with I don't know that we always understand the nuance in vernacular. So let me say a little bit more because that's not enough to cut it. When I share something with person A, B, C, or D, the words that I'm using might sound familiar to that person. And so we think we have a shared understanding, but a lot of times we actually don't. The same word might mean two different things to two different people, or three different things to three different people. And it takes time and patience to deconstruct, what does this mean to me as compared to what it means to you. That process can take more time than sometimes what we want to give. So I feel like digging in on simple things can be frustrating. So it's easy. And now I'm going to go back to your avoidance. I think it can be easy to want to avoid those frustrating conversations, or those conversations where we take for granted that we're really on the same page when maybe we're not. So tell me what makes sense about that, and tell me what maybe doesn't, because I'm articulating this really kind of for the first time out loud.
It sounded very articulate to me. I think you're absolutely right. We assume that we understand language the same way. We also assume that we know each other when we don't. So we're making assumptions. How do I think about this? I think what we actually know about somebody is what we have personally experienced. And then we just make up the rest. We just make it up.
It's true. It's true.
We either make up stuff like early in a relationship, we probably make up mostly stuff that's good. Like, I know this much about the person I'm dating, and I make up all this other stuff that we're in agreement about all of these things. And then gradually it's a series of disillusionments, right? But later in a relationship, I think it can go the other way. We have a bunch of water under the bridge. And now I know more about you. And what I don't know, I'm making up because you're an asshole. So
Have you been in my house, Martha? I think I've been guilty of that before.
I mean, who hasn't? This is
Right.
so human nature, right?
Yeah. So, what do you think are some of the basics? And let's talk about this together. What do you think are some of the basic elements that are important in communication? I want to even talk about some of the ABCs and one, two, threes, and not, speaking of taking knowledge for granted, not take it for granted. Because even though I do my practice 5 days a week, it's not often that I come back to the basics and say, okay, what are the most meaningful elements of communication? So, maybe we take a second and think about what those are before we go into a little bit about why people use some of the less adaptive techniques that they use. So, the first one, maybe we play a very slow game of popcorn. And by very slow, I mean very slow game of popcorn. One of the first things that I can think about communication is body language. When we're communicating to someone, taking the time to look at them and maybe have some eye contact. And we know, depending on where people are, eye contact can be more comfortable or less comfortable, but at least having your body facing the other person feels like a useful element of communication.
And when I think about starting communication, I think about the importance of getting in touch with the self, just figuring out, taking a look inside, taking a quiet moment and asking, like, what is it that's important to me here? What is it that I am interested in sharing about myself? Or what is it that I am hoping to understand better about my partner? Just to have a clarifying moment. Because if I just start right out communicating, it's likely to be all over the place, a big cloud. And if I can spend a minute and refine this to what feels most pressing or important to me today, is it sharing something about my perception, or is it understanding something about their perception? Let's just keep it fairly concise so that there's a safer feeling container for whatever might come up rather than being all over the place to start with. And I think that really starts, at least to me, it starts in being in touch with myself. How does that land for you?
Boy, that hits the mark. And it's so deep. I know I said the basics, the one, two, threes, and the ABCs, but I really experienced that as a really deep and effective way to communicate. You can look at the surface level of that, or it could go down much deeper. So the surface version of that might look like, have some idea of what your goal for the communication is. Do I want to share? Do I want to receive? and know what mood you're in. Okay. If I were going to redact that down to some real basic language, just kind of have a sense of what kind of mood you're in. Am I grumpy? Is it a good time for this? Am I already feeling defensive? But the layers where it goes down deeper, I think, in the way that you conveyed it is taking responsibility, maybe, for what's happening internally inside of me and having some interest in the listener's experience, having some interest, not taking responsibility, but having some interest in the listener's experience. So if I know that I've been angry all day and my car wouldn't start and that one light that takes 10 minutes to get through, it turned red just before you got there, then maybe I'm going to think that the user experience of having a conversation with me might not be that great. So if I can recognize that, maybe I'll wait to share or listen. Is that relevant at all to what you were saying, Martha? Or have I taken us down a completely different path?
I think this is all one path. This is all the path of what goes into a communication. I think your route there is perfect because curiosity, I liked your user experience reference. I liked that. Not because I think we shouldn't communicate if we're in a less than ideal headspace or heart space, but just because there might be some things that I could do to improve my head or heart space before I sit down to have a
Mm.
hard conversation. Do I want to go for a walk? Do I want to make sure I get a workout in? Do I want to spend some time doing something creative? Like, what is going to help me get from pissed off about all the ways that my day went sideways to in a collaborative space with someone? And we can push it down the road. I could just not do it when I'm in a bad mood or when my partner's in a bad mood. But sometimes I can push it downstream pretty far because of stressful
Mhm.
times and moments and periods of life. So what I like that you're introducing is the idea that you could check and then you could adjust and you could make a fairly explicit decision within yourself. What are the costs and risks about bringing this up right now versus pushing it downstream? And everything has
Mhm.
a risk. So just sort of looking at it and weighing it. Is this the right moment? Isn't it the right moment? If I push it downstream, how hard is it for me? I'm ready to do it now. I think I could do it. Sometimes good mood, bad mood, nobody cares. The most important thing is I've been pushing this downstream for a decade and a half. And now I think I could spit it out. I don't care if it's good, bad, or ugly. I want to get it out. So it could be anything
Mm.
along that continuum, I think.
I like that you're pointing our attention toward like a lack of perfectionism, right? So, we're taking all these ingredients of like, okay, I can self check and I can modulate, but I don't want to be avoidant. And sometimes I think it's easy to use, it's not the right time. I was in a bad mood. And if I'm hearing you correctly, I think that's what you're kind of getting at, that we use that and it becomes another form of avoidance. So I can appreciate you bringing us back to that. Another element of communication is being able to listen and perhaps even reflect. And I've been guilty of this, listening with the intention of deciding what I'm going to be able to say. And I think when I listen to reflect back or listen to take in, it's a whole different type of listening. So in this game of popcorn and talking about communication, that would be my next thing. How about we do one more and then we move along and talk about ways that the maladaptive techniques can disrupt our whole goal. Do you have anything else
Mm,
to add about communication?
yeah. My personal favorite, curiosity. If there was one thing I could like wave my magic wand and communicate somehow this skill into every being, it would be curiosity. Can you ask a good
Mm.
question, ask an open ended question, then invite somebody to share themselves with you? So instead of getting defensive or armoring up or walling back or getting one up or sinking into shame, instead, just ask a question like, what is that like for you? Or, I don't really get that. Can you walk me around through that a little bit? Show me what this is through your eyes. I think curiosity is like the magic conflict management skill that most of us don't have. Skye, let's circle back for a second. I have a question for you that you already asked me. What do you think are some of the blocks that come up for people when it comes to just saying what's true for them or speaking up about what's important for them?
Yeah, I think that a lot of times there's a desire to align with your person, partner, friend, human that you're speaking with. And in that interest of alignment, I think sometimes we can get a little bit lost, a little bit carried away by the current of the conversation. And then the next thing we know, we have totally missed an opportunity to have an assertion of who we are. And when I say assertion, I'm not talking about like putting our foot down and making a dogmatic statement, but just some entry in the conversation that says, this is how I'm a little bit different from you. So that desire for alignment, consciously, unconsciously, I think gets in the way. Fear of naming things, naming your own truth. So you talked a little bit about that. That's where we agree. Vulnerability and a fear of rejection. The idea that you're going to see something in who I am that you find undesirable. And how is that going to impact my sense of self? That I'm going to be viewed through this lens of negativity. That can be really threatening to someone's sense of self, especially if it's a relationship that is important. And then for some people, I think it's literally a new concept. And this goes back to kind of what you said, where maybe the family of origin where I was raised, I like to call it the soil that you were grown in, did not have a space where you could say, this is my preference. This is what I think. Maybe that was seen as disrespectful or talking back in your particular family. So these are some of the things that I think are reasons why people don't necessarily want to speak up.
Yeah, that's a great list. I think that's a perfect list. Let me ground all of this in our overarching theme and topic of sex. So, we're talking about what would go into a conversation that might be stressful for partners about sex specifically, but obviously with some of these relational concepts like what is it? What's good communication? What goes into it? Goal setting intervention, stuff like that. It's applicable to any work that you might be doing in therapy or coaching. It's a lot of it's applicable if you're a healthcare provider or pelvic floor physical therapist or what have you. But let's ground this particular idea in a conversation about sex. So can I just pose an example that we
Do
can
it.
talk a little bit?
Do it. Do it. Do it. Yes.
Okay. So for our listeners, I just want to remind you, we go there, we talk about sex. And so here it comes. So if you need to like put on earbuds or whatever before I start using sex words, you go for it. So this comes up sometimes when somebody is interested in doing something sexually or experimenting with something sexual that they haven't yet discussed with their partner and that they're worried that they're going to get bad feedback about or some kind of a big reaction. And this can range from, I'm not really interested in oral sex, if I'm absolutely honest with you, to, I really want to have anal sex. Can we have a conversation about that? To, I have a particular kink and I'm scared to talk to you about it. And it's often pathologized. To, you have a specific kink that I find anti-erotic. So that's sort of my short list of very common, tough conversations about sex, aside
Yeah.
from the sort of most common, probably, which is just, I want a different amount of sex than you do. But there's
Yeah.
also, I want a different kind of sex than we're having at this point. So I'm just curious if you could kind of take that ball and run with it a little bit.
Yeah, I can. So I'm going to actually use what I've already started with and be more specific. So a lot of people that I've spent time with just assume that sex is supposed to be natural and easy. And it looks that way on TV. I mean, those are well coordinated scenes, right? How many takes have they had to get those amazing, perfectly coordinated scenes? But with this concept being so prevalent, at least with the people that I've seen in my office, that this should come easily, this should come naturally. There's an assumption that we should not have to talk about it. And with that assumption, there automatically is a burden or a block to being able to say some of the things that you just named. So that takes us to literally a new concept that talking about sex is literally a new concept for some. And especially being able to make that assertion that I'm interested in this or I'm not interested in that. Now, let's look at the vulnerability rejection piece that I was just talking about before from a general perspective. When we're talking about our sexuality, which can be a very vulnerable topic for some, the idea that I'm in this moment with you and it's supposed to look like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And I'm going to take that moment and insert something that I've never said before. There is a high risk because the vulnerability is bi-directional, right? So maybe for person A, there's vulnerability, and for person B, there's vulnerability. And person A wants to insert something new into the moment or say something that maybe they haven't even heard their own voice say that yet. So it's fresh for their ears. It's fresh for the partner's ears. And that can be really scary. That could ruin, if you will, air quote, the vibe. So not only are we dealing with vulnerability and rejection, but we're potentially even dealing with the belief that, well, now the sexual encounter is going to end, or it will be labeled as a bad sexual encounter. So those are a couple of things that I can think of. And now let's go to that last one where I said the desire to align with the other person. So if you are under the belief that this person wants the thing that you're currently doing, and maybe you don't know that they want other things, or maybe you do, but you believe that they maybe aren't interested in what you want, and you want to please that person for all the reasons why we want to please the people in our lives, that can be a really big block to communication as well. The desire to align, the desire to feel the closeness that comes with alignment. And so there's that risk there. But what I see oftentimes in my practice is risks can have big rewards as well. And I've seen individuals take the leap and get something that they had zero idea was possible, less than zero, like negative idea that was possible. So it can be so worth it.
Yes, agreed. And in fact, I think vulnerability itself, whether you agree or don't agree, if you are vulnerable and present together and you're able to anybody in the conversation, be vulnerable, present, and connected in the conversation, you don't even have to agree for it to end up to have been an experience of deepening and strengthening a sense of psychic safety, really.
Yeah. And I want to make sure to come and jump in and say, I do work with individuals and spend time with individuals who have a variety of different sexual styles and sexual engagement. And while it may sound like we're talking about, or I specifically was talking about a couple, there are clients of mine who are not in a dyadic relationship for their sexual encounters. And so I just want to name that. And it would still hold true that sometimes there can be fear about bringing certain things up, especially in the moment.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes. I mean, this could be a hard conversation about I identify as asexual or honey, I would love to explore opening our relationship. Those are some examples of conversations that a lot of people are very nervous about having and maybe really putting language to for the very first time.
So another thing that I hear when I'm working maybe with an individual is, what if they say no? What if I open myself up? I commit to that vulnerability. I do all of the things that I've been practicing in here. And my partner says no. Maybe I should never have brought that up. So this is a conclusion that sometimes people come to. What do you think are important ingredients for helping people deconstruct no as a negative word and look at that a little bit differently? How do you think about that? And how do you help the people that you work with think about that?
Well, something you said just a little while ago, I think fits right into this spot beautifully. When I hear an honest response from my partner, I'm learning about my partner. So I could be very focused on my experience of vulnerability, fear, worry, anxiety, desire, disappointment, and all of that. Or I could do a little magic trick and shift my focus to what my partner is experiencing so that I can get the deepening that comes from vulnerability. So while it was I'm going to just use me as an example here because the pronouns are simpler. I did this and my partner did that, right? So for this example, if I say I'm interested in such and such sexual exploration, and my partner, whose name is Joanne, says back to me, I am not, then I am sure that I would have some kind of emotion. And internally, what I'd like to be able to do is to coach myself toward curiosity so that ultimately I can understand her better and she can understand me better. And then we'll get that kind of magical connection thing, even without agreeing on the thing. The tricky part is if I'm not in a good headspace or she's not in a good headspace, and instead we get sideways, defensive and pissed off and disappointed and blaming and like all that stuff that comes along with a bad interaction, then the whole thing kind of gets, I think, mapped as that was a icky experience I don't want to repeat. And then it gets filed under that's why we don't talk about this stuff. And
Yep.
so the confirmation bias is just waiting for verification that it was a bad idea to bring it up in the first place. And so that's the really big pitfall, I think. I think no matter what happens, maybe we don't file it under, I'm never going to do that again. And instead, try to frame it as, okay, that was stressful and difficult. And it's an opportunity now for me to get curious about what was stressful about that for her and for her to get curious about what was stressful about it for me so that we can learn together about each other around this thing.
Yeah, that's really good. Something you said made me think about when a partner says no and getting curious. I wonder what it would look like to have, can you tell me more about that? Like on standby, like on speed dial, so that this is in your regular vernacular as opposed to, well, why not? Which can sound like an accusation, or it can sound kind of like a bullet or a dagger. And maybe sometimes that can come from genuine curiosity, but sometimes it comes from a place of defensiveness. So I do like the language. Tell me more about that. I want to hear more about that. What's that like for you? So we're trying to get the attention of somebody who wants to start talking about sex and sexuality, but they haven't really done that. And maybe they're working with, let's just say, a couple. And we want to introduce them not only to the language of kind of bringing it up. Let's say they've already brought it up when they first started working with this dyad. And now they're asking more specifically, do you have a language where you can talk about what you want from each other sexually? Is there a specific way that you like to do that?
I like how you just did it. I mean, I often have asked, do you talk with one another about sex?
Oh,
How does it go? Have you shared about what you like, what you want to try, what you want to explore? Do you give each other feedback in real time? Do you talk about it after the fact? Do you ever talk about it at all?
that was awesome. That
Yes.
was great. I wonder how the person who's listening, who may not have a lot of familiarity with bringing up these topics, I wonder how that feels for them, because it felt very like just trying to put myself back and thinking about some of the models that you teach in your ATSIP course. I remember how learning some of those phrases was so non-threatening for me. And I'm really hearing all of those questions kind of with those, trying to hear those with the beginner's mind. And all of them felt very non threatening, very possible. Like I could say those words. And what have you found when you've said those words to clients? How have they responded?
Oh, mostly they respond well. Occasionally, I've had somebody say, I really don't feel very comfortable talking about sex. And then I say, thank you so much for sharing. Should we continue this conversation or would you like to pivot? And usually they're like, no, keep going. Just know this is like a little bit of a thing for me. And occasionally somebody says, time to like get the spotlight off of me, or time to, don't ask me about that, or I'm not ready to answer that. And I always say, that's totally fine. Thank you for sharing. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. I mean, therapy is uncomfortable almost by definition. And for many people, talking about sex is also uncomfortable. So it's no surprise that it's feeling a little exposing for you. And so let's just be in communication about it. I don't want to assume that if somebody's uncomfortable, that means we should not talk about it. I will sometimes say, it makes sense to me that this is nervous making for you. And we don't have to talk about it. And if we don't talk about it, it's going to be hard for me to help. So I'm curious where you're hoping to get with this and what would make sense to you. Because we could pivot for a while and work in some other area while we get to know each other better. Or you could just be in really close communication with me about your comfort level as we go along. And if you're willing to say, ooh, that was a stretch too far, back up a little, I promise you, I will respect that. So sometimes we can just kind of tenderly kind of ease through it. But to your observation that the language itself is pretty accessible, I just want to say, not at first, it's not. I like your suggestion of come up with a few phrases and get them on speed dial so that you don't have to just pull this out of thin air when you're feeling activated and nervous. Instead, maybe rehearse a little bit. When I started trying to figure out what language do I think would be accessible and inclusive and kind of hit all the marks that I am hoping as a sex therapist doing an assessment, crafting that language was really a process of me saying a bunch of stuff out loud, trying it out with a bunch of clients and just seeing like, how do people receive this or versus that? Like if I'm evaluating, for instance, I'm curious if somebody reaches orgasm when they want to. So I chose when you want to, because I think that's relevant. I don't want to endorse the idea that you have to reach orgasm. I want to endorse the idea that it's your choice. And when you want to reach orgasm, are you able to reach orgasm? And then I follow that up with, is there a difference between alone or with a partner? And that's carefully crafted. If I go right in and say, do you masturbate? Then like a half of the population is going to freak right out. And masturbation is such a weighted term that's just got like sin crusted all around it. And so I'm much more likely to say, do you touch yourself for pleasure? And I've really worked to get my language honed to send the message I want to send without being avoidant about sex. And so I guess what I would encourage people who are new to this conversation, take the language, like I give it away for free. Take the language that I use and experiment with it a little bit. Run your own experiment, set your own goal, run your experiment, and see what it's like, see what it feels like to you. And remember that the outcome measure of success is whether you had a plan and did it. So if you decide, I want to try this and I'm going to experiment with this language from this brief assessment that Martha's got, then try that. And if it makes your client uncomfortable, compliment them for telling you that they're uncomfortable or check in with them. What is it like for you to be in this conversation? It's pretty explicit. How are you doing? So I went on a bit of a tangent there, but
I loved it. I loved it. Can I point out something that you did that I was like, yeah, Martha. Okay. When you said that you asked the question and then if they express discomfort, you don't run away from it. You don't take that first exit door. I was like, that is so true. I love everything about that because I think that had I not taken your course and had the information that I had, it would have been very easy. As soon as someone expressed any discomfort, it would have been like, okay, well, we don't have to talk about that. We don't have to talk about that. Let's box that right up and seal it with a big old thing of like duct tape and on to the next thing. But just like you, I did find that people could name their squirminess around the topic and discussing it in therapy, but they still oftentimes wanted to stay with the conversation. And I know I would have missed that had I not been doing exactly what you suggested, taking advantage of the free language that you put out there and experimenting with it and then making it my own. So I really want to come back and highlight that it does not mean necessarily that you make the decision for the client that we are now going to pivot. And I'm using that language on purpose and saying, you make a decision for the client. The other thing that I want to make sure that I highlight, because I enjoyed it so much, is we talked about modeling in one of our podcasts and how the therapist is always having the opportunity to model something. So when that language that is carefully crafted is utilized in the therapy space, and when someone expresses, oh, I'm a little uncomfortable, and then it's like, would you still like to talk about this? Is it okay if we stay with it? This is something that can be used in your own relationship. So you're helping the client open up a dialogue, and then you're modeling a way for them to open up a dialogue. And after all, we are talking about communication. So really nicely done. And I'm here to say, I'll just go on record and testify that the language really does work.
That's good to hear. Yeah. And, the course and the stuff that we're talking about here will all be in the show notes. So if you have questions about this, just check the show notes.
We're not here to keep secrets. We're here to share. Absolutely. Thanks for reminding everybody of that, Martha.
One thing that came up for me as you were talking about this is I'm trying to link this back to the hypothetical question between partners about I want to, let's use anal sex as an example, because some people are very nervous about it. Some people are very matter of fact. So let's imagine that we have two people that we're working with who are sexually intimate together, and one of them wants to explore anal sex and the other one does not want to explore anal sex. So the modeling that you were just talking about, can we stay with the conversation, is a great example of something that I like to have easy access to that language, and I like my clients to have easy access to that language. So if I ask my partner, I'm interested in doing this, are you interested in doing this? And she says, I'm not interested in doing that. We each have an opportunity to be curious about the other person's experience and perspective. And in sort of the ideal low conflict situation, I would imagine we would just have a free flowing conversation where I can say, okay, I hear you no, and I'm not going to pressure you. And I wonder if we could stay in the conversation a little bit, why it feels important to me or interesting to me, what's intriguing to me about it. Also, I'd really like to understand from you what is not interesting to you about it, and what are all the things around this for each of us, just so that we can know the territory that we're talking about. And one thing that's really important about that, I think, is when there's a new thing that maybe you haven't experienced before, or you've had a negative experience with before, or you've heard a bunch of negative stories, or there's a bunch of negative garbage in the culture around it. It is a stretch to do that stuff. And just dropping it and never discussing it again is not the best strategy, I think. It's really common to need like multiple exposures that feel emotionally safe. So if we have multiple conversations, like, I'm still thinking about this. Can we talk about it again? Would you be willing to watch a documentary? Is there anything adjacent that we could explore together that would just help us continue to get to know each other around this and also explore this territory that's of interest to one and not the other? So I think there's kind of a mythology. At some point, I should just stop bringing it up. And in fact, the partner might say, you know what? I'm tired of you bringing it up. And a good kind of question to ask yourself is, how am I bringing it up? Is there pressure in the way that I'm bringing it up? Am I actually pressuring my partner about this? And to your earlier question, how am I handling my disappointment internally? What am I doing for myself to support the part of me that's a little sad about this or disappointed or disillusioned? And how am I being of support to my partner who is, if you're feeling disappointed, it's easy to pathologize your partner. But I offer a reframe. Your partner's a rock star because they're in this conversation with you still. So, right? So like, give some love to the person who's still talking about the thing that makes them very uncomfortable and say, I appreciate this. And I want to remind you, I will never pressure you to do something sexually intimate that you don't want to do. I will not pressure you. And I'd like to keep the topic alive for us to just hold gently and let be in our space. So I'm just curious how that all lands for you.
Bravo, brava. I loved it
Mhm.
so much, Martha. It felt so incredibly relational. I want to add another phrase that could be useful to someone. Would you be interested in my sharing how this got on my radar? Would you be interested in hearing from me about what this request means to me? And I would want to marry that with your statement, and I will not pressure. So I think the two of those together at some point just feels super duper nice.
So good. You bet. And I love how that's a clear request. So I often think about the difference between a complaint or criticism or just generally broadcasting distress and making a clear request. You never want to talk about this. It's important to me. I don't want to be in a relationship where this isn't part of what we're talking about. Those are ways of saying, I want to talk about this. But perhaps a better way of saying, I want to talk about this is to say, my darling, I would like to talk about this. Would you be willing to be in a conversation about it? And I won't pressure you.
Very relational and very potentially effective. Now, when you mentioned earlier about having the conversation more than once, maybe even having the conversation more than twice, I could imagine that that could feel very threatening and like, oh, am I violating one of your boundaries because you've expressed that you weren't interested? So, by virtue of bringing this back up, is this somehow a violation of consent, or is this somehow something that is going to disrupt a boundary? But just like what you modeled earlier when you were talking about a client who says, I'm uncomfortable, and staying with the conversation, giving the client the option, would you like to stay with this or should we pivot? We can do the same with our partners and not make those assumptions that because it gave them the ick the first time, we don't want to make a decision for them that the conversation is automatically off the table. So we could also ask, under what conditions, if any, would you feel comfortable having us have a part two about this? And maybe they might say, well, if we weren't in the moment, then it might feel more comfortable. I don't know what would possibly be said, but I think setting it up to maybe share some of that power. Under what conditions would it feel comfortable that we could have a part two about this? Or I might like to have a part two about this. So would you be willing to think about the conditions? This is what I would hope for if we had a part two. This is how I want to show up and hold myself accountable if and when we have a part two. So you're conveying to that person that I'm going to be responsible. I'm going to handle this responsibly. And I have these standards that I hope to live up to. I might not be able to, but I hope to. Or even saying, if you notice that I'm doing A, B, or C when I said I wouldn't, hey, could you bring me in? Could you let me know that I'm doing that thing? Because I want the conditions to be as efficacious as possible for us to both feel like we're winning, regardless if we take this step or not.
Oh, that was so lovely. I love that. When I think about who knows the answer to the question, am I violating consent for you? Test question.
Yeah.
The only person on the whole planet that knows the answer to that question is the person that you're talking to. And so your script here, if I can offer that language as something that somebody could use, of under what circumstances or under what conditions or what would help this feel more comfortable for you, that's a way of bringing somebody into the conversation in a position of power. This feels comfortable to me. This feels less comfortable to me. Another way to do it is simply just to say, like, I don't want to pressure you. How are you doing with the pressure thing? But
Well,
I think it's really beautiful as a step along that way to have an eye on getting to what helps you feel comfortable and what feels less comfortable for you so that I can continue to know you better and understand better what's going to feel good to you, because it's very important to me that we be able to talk about various sex practices in an open way. And if those conversations feel in any way gross to you, it's not going to work for me either.
and how satisfying is a conversation like that? The potential for a level of satisfaction even if we're not doing the thing that I had hoped to do in that particular moment. I think everyone could walk away with a little bit of a win. And this is where, a novice sex therapist or even a general practitioner who is talking about sex can help someone have a win without knowing everything that there is to know about sex and sexuality. You really can support a couple or an individual doing relational work in your office gain some skill.
Oh,
And
yeah.
in this conversation, neither one of us pulled out our big box of books on
Right.
how to be sex therapists.
Right. Or anal sex.
Or
And you don't have to know the first thing about it, and you can have any opinion you want to have about it, and you could have any history that you have about it, and it is irrelevant here. If the client is like, gee, I think I would feel more comfortable if I understood it better and I didn't know a reference, I would say, you know what? I bet you anything there's a good book or a documentary about that. So let's just have a little internet search and see what we can find,
yeah.
really.
Yeah. What you're getting at is, for me, what you're getting at is relinquishing the need to know everything. Because I can assure you, when I graduated with my doctoral degree in human sexuality, there was still so much that I didn't know. So even if you were an expert's expert, there are still going to be things that none of us know. I don't think that should be a hindrance. I don't think it has to be a hindrance for having a really effective opportunity to support a client.
Completely agree. I often have this enormous bookcase behind me. It's not the only bookcase I have in this room. There are several, and that's no accident. That's because I like to know what reference material is out there. I have an ongoing turnover of new reference books. I'm always behind, and I like to be able to say, here's a book, there's another book. This one's about your thing. And you don't even have to be able to do that. You can really just say, Dr. Google is here for you. Have a little hunt around and see what you find. Take a look. Use an internal sense of knowing to figure out if it's a good fit or not. You
Yeah.
don't even need an expert to say this is a good book or a bad book. I mean, that is one of the roles that I really love having. Like, I don't think this one has accurate information, but this one does. But you can feel a lot and you can figure out a lot from the reviews. And, are the reviews coming from people with some sort of relevant credential? Are the reviews coming from people who clearly have a moral stance in opposition to the material of the book? Or, just like, use a little web intelligence here, but you don't have to be an expert to figure it out.
And I think also of how many things that were not, even when I was a general practitioner before I entered into the specialty, I did the same sort of thing for if we were talking about anxiety or if we were talking about a relational wound that someone might have. I still didn't know everything. I still referred people to outside resources like, oh, there's some good podcasts out there about this, or there's some good books out there about this. So gaining a comfortability with not knowing is probably one of the most important skills that I continue to work on as a sex therapist, as someone who has a specialty in this area. Because I don't think I'm ever going to know it all. And even if I know it all, I'm still not going to know what's right for you. I need your help to figure
That,
that out.
that's absolutely right. So all of this is modeling curiosity for your clients to begin to sort of see, back to our topic of communication, a tense, potentially conflictual conversation as an opportunity to get to know you.
I agree. And Martha, I think that once again, this is probably a conversation that we could say a whole lot more on. What do you think we start to wrap this one up and keep inviting people to stay with us? Because if you like this conversation, I can promise you that there's going to be more where we're talking about communication. There's still lots to say about how to build the infrastructure so that people can begin to talk about sex and sexuality with some level of comfort, and to help our friends who are leading therapy sessions and the coaching sessions so that they have more comfortability too.
Perfect.
Well, we'll see you the next time. Thanks, everybody.
So I want to tell you that I've got a free series about therapeutic goal setting that you can sign up for right now. It doesn't cost anything, and it's based on my observations from consulting groups for lots of therapists. getting crisp on goals can make all the difference. So you'll see me in some video role plays landing the goal setting intervention and also unpacking what I'm thinking about in those situations so that you can hopefully take that information and put it into practice yourself. All the details are in the show notes.
Okay, friends, you've just listened to Martha and I talk not just about goal setting, but some of our own personal stories and what we bring personally and professionally to our work. If any of what I showed up with today resonates with you, you can find me at workwithdrskye.com. My coaching practice offers practical and relational support. I'd love to hear from you. Again, that's workwithdrskye.com.